The glass doors of Luxe Fashion sparkled under the afternoon sun as another busy Saturday unfolded in the upscale shopping district. Inside the boutique, soft jazz music played while the scent of expensive perfume mixed with new leather goods filled the air. Crystal had been working there for almost 4 years now, and she knew exactly how this game was played. She stood behind the polished counter, carefully folding a silk blouse that cost more than most people made in a week. Her perfectly manicured nails caught the light as she worked, and her designer outfit looked like it belonged in the store's window display. Crystal had learned early on that appearance mattered everything in this business. Customers needed to see success when they looked at her. The store was her kingdom, and she ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Every morning, she would arrive 30 minutes early to make sure her section looked perfect. The handbags were arranged by color and price. The jewelry sparkled under the spotlights, and not a single item was out of place. Her co-workers often joked that she could spot a misplaced price tag from across the room, but Crystal's real talent wasn't organizing merchandise. It was reading people. She could tell within seconds of someone walking through those glass doors whether they were worth her time. The way they carried themselves, the quality of their shoes, the confidence in their stride, it all told a story. And Crystal had become an expert at reading those stories. Take the woman who had just left, for example. Designer purse, fresh highlights, expensive watch glinting on her wrist. Crystal had spent 45 minutes with her, showing her 3 different evening gowns and matching accessories. The final sale was over $2,000, and Crystal's commission would cover her rent for the month. That was how you did business in a place like this. Her colleague Riley worked differently. The younger woman treated every customer like they might buy the entire store. It didn't matter if someone walked in wearing flip-flops and a gas station t-shirt. Riley would greet them with the same bright smile and enthusiastic energy she gave to their wealthiest clients. Crystal found it exhausting just watching her. "You're wasting your energy," Crystal had told Riley during their last break together. "Time is money in retail. You spend 20 minutes with someone who buys a $30 scarf, and you miss the chance to help someone who might spend $300. Riley had just shrugged and said something about treating everyone with kindness. Crystal appreciated the sentiment, she really did, but kindness didn't pay the bills. Results did, and Crystal's sales numbers proved her approach worked. Month after month, she outsold everyone else on the team. The store manager loved her. The district manager knew her by name, and her paycheck reflected her success. The boutique attracted all kinds of people, but Crystal had learned to categorize them quickly. There were the serious buyers, well-dressed individuals who walked with purpose and usually knew exactly what they wanted. These were Crystal's favorite customers. Then there were the browsers, people who might buy something small but were mostly just looking. Crystal would be polite to these customers but wouldn't waste too much energy on them. Finally, there were the time wasters. These people wandered in off the street with no intention of buying anything. Maybe they were waiting for someone. Maybe they were just curious about the prices, or maybe they thought they could afford something but quickly realized they couldn't. Crystal had developed a sixth sense about these customers, and she'd learned to politely redirect them before they took up too much of her valuable time. The system worked perfectly. Crystal's regular customers loved her because she gave them her full attention. Her sales numbers stayed high because she focused her energy where it mattered most, and the store benefited because Crystal helped create an atmosphere where serious shoppers felt valued and important. Of course, not everyone understood her approach. Riley sometimes gave her looks when Crystal would redirect certain customers to the sale rack or suggest they might find what they were looking for at other stores. But Crystal had tried Riley's approach when she first started working there, and it had been a disaster. She'd spent hours with customers who bought nothing, while missing opportunities with people who actually had money to spend. The fashion retail world was competitive and demanding. Customers expected expertise, attention, and results. They wanted to feel special, valued, and understood. Crystal delivered all of that to the customers who mattered. She'd learned that trying to please everyone meant pleasing no one, and her success proved that focusing on the right customers was the smart business strategy. As the afternoon wore on, Crystal noticed the usual mix of people flowing through the store. A young couple looked at watches in the jewelry section, probably shopping for an engagement ring. Their clothes were nice but not expensive. Their body language was careful and hesitant. Crystal made a mental note to let Riley handle them. They might buy something eventually, but it would take patience and time that Crystal could better spend elsewhere. An older woman in a beautiful coat examined the handbag display. Now that was someone worth approaching. Crystal could tell from across the room that the woman's current purse cost more than most people's car payments. Her posture was confident, her movements decisive. This was a serious shopper with serious money. Crystal smoothed her hair and walked over with her most professional smile. The next hour would likely be very profitable, and she felt that familiar thrill of a potential big sale. This was why she loved her job. When you knew how to read people, when you understood what they wanted before they even said it, magic happened. Money changed hands, customers left happy, and Crystal's reputation grew stronger. The rain had started outside, which always brought interesting challenges. Some people would duck into stores just to stay dry, while others would brave the weather only if they had serious shopping to do. Crystal glanced toward the windows, watching drops race down the glass. Rainy days could be slow, but they could also bring the most determined customers, people who had made special trips and weren't leaving empty-handed. She looked around her domain one more time, making sure everything was still perfect. In a few hours, she'd count up the day's sales and feel that satisfaction of another successful day. Her approach might not be for everyone, but it worked for her. And in a business where results were everything, working was all that mattered. The rain was coming down harder now, creating a steady rhythm against the boutique's large windows. Crystal had just finished helping the woman with the expensive coat, who had purchased a beautiful leather handbag and matching wallet. Another successful sale that would boost her numbers for the week. She was organizing the receipt when she heard the familiar chime of the front door opening. Without looking up immediately, Crystal could tell from the sound of the footsteps that this wasn't her usual type of customer. Instead of the confident click of heels or the purposeful stride of dress shoes, she heard the soft squeak of what sounded like work boots against the polished floor. The footsteps were hesitant, almost apologetic, as if the person wasn't sure they belonged in such an upscale place. When Crystal finally glanced toward the entrance, her assumptions were confirmed. A man stood near the doorway, clearly uncomfortable in the elegant surroundings. His jeans had seen better days, with small stains and worn patches that spoke of actual work, rather than designer distressing. His t-shirt was faded and wrinkled like he'd grabbed it from a laundry basket that morning. But it was his boots that really caught Crystal's attention. Heavy, scuffed work boots that looked like they'd spent time on construction sites or in warehouses. The man's hair was messy from the rain, and he had several days of stubble on his face. His hands looked rough and calloused, the kind that came from years of manual labor. He stood there for a moment, looking around the store with wide eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the displays of luxury items surrounding him. Crystal sighed quietly and returned to her paperwork. This was exactly the kind of situation she'd learned to handle efficiently over the years. The man was obviously in the wrong place. Probably ducked in to escape the rain and would realize quickly that he couldn't afford anything here. Better to let him figure that out on his own, rather than waste time on someone who clearly wasn't going to make a purchase. Riley, of course, had noticed the new customer immediately. Crystal watched as her colleague approached the man with her usual bright smile and enthusiastic greeting. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Luxe Fashion. Is there anything specific you're looking for today?" The man seemed surprised by the warm welcome. His face lit up a little as he responded, "Oh, thank you. I'm actually looking for something special. My daughter is getting married next month, and I wanted to find her something beautiful for the wedding." Crystal rolled her eyes internally. A wedding gift from someone dressed like that would probably be a $50 scarf at most. She continued with her inventory, half listening to the conversation while focusing on more important tasks. Riley was wasting her time again, but that was Riley's problem. "That's so exciting," Riley was saying. "Congratulations to your family. What kind of thing were you thinking about? We have some beautiful jewelry, scarves, or maybe something for her to wear." The man seemed to relax a little at Riley's genuine enthusiasm. "Well, she's always loved elegant things. Even when she was little, she would play dress-up with her mother's jewelry and fancy clothes. I thought maybe something she could wear on her wedding day or keep as a memory." Crystal glanced over again, noting how the man's face had softened when talking about his daughter. There was real love there, but love didn't pay for luxury items. She'd seen this scenario countless times, people with big hearts and small wallets who wandered into expensive stores thinking they could afford something special for important occasions. Riley was already leading the man toward the jewelry counter, showing him various pieces and explaining their features with genuine interest. Crystal could hear fragments of their conversation as she worked. The man was asking thoughtful questions about the craftsmanship and materials, showing more knowledge about fine jewelry than his appearance might suggest. After about 15 minutes, Crystal noticed the man walking toward her section. He was looking at a display case filled with silk scarves and accessories, his expression thoughtful. Riley was helping another customer who had just arrived, so the man was on his own for the moment. He approached Crystal's counter, where she was arranging a new shipment of designer handbags. Up close, she could see that despite his worn clothes, he had kind eyes and spoke with a surprisingly gentle, educated voice. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I was wondering if you could help me with something." Crystal looked up with barely concealed impatience. She had important work to finish before the store closed, and dealing with browsers wasn't part of her priority list. "What do you need?" she asked, her tone professional but clearly rushed. The man seemed to sense her reluctance but pressed on anyway. "I was looking at that beautiful scarf over there, the blue silk one with the silver threads. Do you have anything similar but maybe in a different color? My daughter loves purple, and I thought something like that might be perfect for her wedding." Crystal glanced at the scarf he was pointing to. It was one of their most expensive pieces, priced at over $400. The idea that this man could afford it seemed laughable. She didn't even bother to check their computer system for alternatives. "That scarf only comes in the colors you see displayed," she said curtly, turning back to her handbags. "Everything we have is out on the floor." The man waited a moment, clearly hoping she might offer to check or suggest alternatives. When she didn't, he tried again. "Would it be possible to special order something? Or maybe you have something similar in a different style?" Crystal looked up with visible irritation. She was busy, and this conversation was going nowhere productive. "Look, if you don't see what you want, maybe you should try some of the other stores in the mall. They might have more options in your price range." The suggestion was clearly meant to send him elsewhere, and the man seemed to understand. His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something crossing his face. Disappointment maybe, or recognition of how he was being treated. But he remained polite. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, could you at least tell me about the quality of this piece? What makes it special?" Crystal barely glanced at the scarf. "It's silk. It's expensive. That's about all there is to say." She turned her attention back to her work, making it clear that the conversation was over as far as she was concerned. The man stood there for another moment, probably processing the rude treatment he'd just received. Crystal could feel him watching her, but she kept her eyes on her tasks. Finally, she heard his boots squeaking across the floor as he walked away. From the corner of her eye, Crystal could see him browsing other sections of the store, occasionally picking up items to examine them more closely. He spent a long time looking at a display of elegant watches, holding one up to the light to examine its face. His movements were careful and respectful, like someone who understood the value of beautiful things even if he couldn't afford them. Riley had finished with her other customer and was approaching the man again, ready to continue helping him. Crystal shook her head slightly. Some people never learned that time spent on unlikely customers was time wasted, but that was Riley's business, not hers. The rain continued to pound against the windows, and Crystal went back to her work, confident that she'd handled the situation appropriately. She had real customers to think about, real sales to make, and real goals to achieve. There was no room in her day for charity work or pointless conversations with people who were clearly just window shopping. The man in the work boots spent nearly 30 more minutes in the store after Crystal's dismissive treatment. She watched him from the corner of her eye as he moved slowly through different sections, examining items with careful attention. Despite her rudeness, he maintained his quiet, respectful demeanor, never touching anything carelessly or leaving items in disarray. Riley had returned to help him several more times, showing him different pieces and patiently answering his questions. Crystal could hear fragments of their conversations, discussions about craftsmanship, materials, and the stories behind certain pieces. The man asked thoughtful questions that showed he understood quality, even if his appearance suggested otherwise. What bothered Crystal most was how Riley treated him with the same enthusiasm and respect she gave to their wealthiest customers. It was almost painful to watch. Riley spent nearly 45 minutes total with the man, showing him various items, explaining their features, and even offering to call other locations to check for specific pieces he'd asked about. Finally, the man approached the counter where Riley was working. Crystal was close enough to overhear their final conversation. "I really appreciate all your help today," he said, his voice warm with genuine gratitude. "You've been incredibly kind and patient with me." Riley smiled brightly. "Of course. That's what we're here for. Did you find something special for your daughter?" The man hesitated for a moment, glancing briefly in Crystal's direction before looking back at Riley. "I'm still thinking about a few options. The pieces you showed me are beautiful, and I can tell this store has exceptional quality. I might need to come back when I've had more time to consider everything." "That sounds perfect," Riley replied. "And please, if you have any questions or want us to hold something while you decide, just give us a call. I'm here most days, and I'd be happy to help." The man thanked Riley again and headed toward the door. Just before he left, he turned back and looked directly at Crystal. There was something in his expression, not anger or resentment, but a kind of quiet disappointment that made her slightly uncomfortable. Then he pushed through the glass doors and disappeared into the rainy afternoon. As soon as he was gone, Crystal couldn't contain herself any longer. She walked over to Riley, who was organizing some jewelry pieces the man had looked at. "You just wasted almost an hour on someone who obviously can't afford anything in here," Crystal said, keeping her voice low so other customers wouldn't hear. "Did you see how he was dressed? Those boots probably cost less than our cheapest scarf." Riley looked up, her expression troubled. "Crystal, that was incredibly rude what you did earlier. I can't believe you treated a customer like that." "I was being realistic," Crystal replied. "This is a business, not a charity. We can't spend all day with people who aren't going to buy anything." "You don't know that he wasn't going to buy anything," Riley shot back. "He seemed genuinely interested in finding something special for his daughter's wedding. And even if he didn't buy something today, maybe he would have come back. Maybe he would have told other people about us. Customer service isn't just about immediate sales." Crystal rolled her eyes. "Riley, I've been doing this for 4 years. I know how to read people. That man probably makes in a month what some of our customers spend on a single item. I was doing him a favor by not letting him waste time looking at things he can't afford." "That's not your decision to make," Riley said firmly. "Everyone who walks through that door deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of how they look or what you think they can afford. What you did was unprofessional and unkind." The criticism stung more than Crystal wanted to admit. She prided herself on her professionalism, and hearing Riley question it bothered her. "My sales numbers speak for themselves," she said defensively. "I outsell everyone in this store because I know how to focus my energy where it matters." "Sales numbers aren't everything," Riley replied. "What matters is how we treat people." That man was polite, respectful, and genuinely interested in finding something beautiful for someone he loves. The least we could do is treat him with basic human decency. Crystal felt her cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. She didn't like being lectured, especially by someone who'd been working there less time than she had. "Fine," she said curtly. "You handle all the browsers and time wasters. I'll stick to the real customers." Riley just shook her head sadly and went back to her work. The rest of the afternoon passed in uncomfortable silence between them. Crystal tried to focus on her tasks, but Riley's words kept echoing in her mind. She found herself replaying the encounter with the man in the work boots, remembering the disappointed look in his eyes when he left. By closing time, Crystal had convinced herself that she'd done nothing wrong. She'd been efficient and honest. For that hurt some people's feelings, that was unfortunate, but it wasn't her problem. She had a job to do, and she did it well. Monday morning brought an unexpected surprise. Crystal arrived at work to find several of her colleagues already gathered in the back office, talking in hushed, excited voices. The store manager, Mrs. Patterson, looked nervous as she organized papers on her desk. "What's going on?" Crystal asked as she hung up her coat. Riley looked up, her expression serious. "We just found out that the store has been sold. There's going to be an all-hands meeting this morning to meet the new owner." Crystal felt a flutter of concern. Change was never good in retail. New owners usually meant new policies, new expectations, and sometimes new staff. She'd worked hard to build her position at Luxe Fashion, and the thought of starting over somewhere else was terrifying. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat to get everyone's attention. "I know this is sudden news for everyone," she began. "The sale happened very quickly. The new owner is someone who's built a reputation in the luxury retail industry for exceptional customer service standards." Crystal's stomach began to twist into knots. Exceptional customer service standards usually meant more time with every customer, more patience with browsers, and more energy spent on people who might not buy anything. Everything she'd spent years learning to avoid. "He actually visited our store this weekend," Mrs. Patterson continued, "to observe our operations without us knowing. He wanted to see how we naturally interact with customers when we don't know we're being watched." The room fell silent as the implications of this sank in. Someone had been watching them work, evaluating their performance without their knowledge. Crystal felt a cold dread creeping up her spine as she remembered the weekend. Saturday had been busy, with the usual mix of customers. She'd handled several big sales, but she'd also... The memory hit her like a physical blow. The man in the work boots, the dismissive treatment, the rude comments about finding stores in his price range. If someone had been watching that interaction, if the new owner had somehow witnessed or heard about it, Crystal tried to calm herself. Even if the new owner had been there, even if he'd seen her interaction with that customer, surely he would understand that she'd been protecting the store's resources. She'd been focusing on profitable customers rather than wasting time. Any business-minded person would appreciate her efficiency. But as she looked around at her colleagues' worried faces, as she remembered Riley's harsh words about professionalism and respect, Crystal began to realize that her approach might not be seen as positively as she'd always assumed. For the first time in her career, she wondered if being right about sales might not be enough if you were wrong about everything else. The conference room at Lux Fashion had never felt so small. Crystal sat with her 5 colleagues around the polished table, each of them stealing nervous glances at the empty chair at the head where their new owner would soon sit. Mrs. Patterson kept checking her watch and shuffling through papers, clearly as anxious as everyone else about this unexpected meeting. Crystal had barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of the man in work boots, remembered his polite questions and her dismissive responses. She'd spent hours trying to convince herself that even if he had been connected to the new ownership somehow, any reasonable business person would understand her approach. She'd been protecting the store's time and resources. She'd been efficient, but deep down a growing sense of dread had been building since Mrs. Patterson's announcement. The timing was too coincidental. A mystery visit over the weekend, followed immediately by news of the sale. Someone had been watching them, evaluating them, and Crystal had a sinking feeling about what they might have seen. Riley sat across from her, occasionally glancing over with an expression that seemed to mix concern with something that might have been pity. Their conversation from Saturday kept replaying in Crystal's mind. Everyone who walks through that door deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of how they look or what you think they can afford. At exactly 9 o'clock, the conference room door opened. Crystal looked up, expecting to see a typical corporate executive in an expensive suit. Instead, her world tilted completely off its axis. The man walking into the room was clean-shaven now, his hair neatly styled. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Crystal made in 2 months. His shoes were polished leather that reflected the conference room lights. But there was no mistaking those eyes, that gentle voice, that careful way of moving. It was him. The man from Saturday. The customer she'd dismissed and insulted. The person she'd assumed couldn't afford a $30 scarf was now sitting at the head of their conference table as their new owner. Crystal felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands began to shake slightly, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some mistake, some explanation that would make sense of this impossible situation. The man, their new owner, looked around the table, making brief eye contact with each employee. When his gaze reached Crystal, it lingered for just a moment longer than the others. There was no anger in his expression, no malice, but there was definitely recognition. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I'm David Chen, and I'm excited to be working with all of you as we move Lux Fashion forward." Crystal's mind reeled. David Chen. She'd heard that name before. He was the entrepreneur who'd built a small family jewelry business into a chain of luxury boutiques across 3 states. He was known for his hands-on approach, his commitment to customer service, and his habit of visiting his stores unannounced to observe operations firsthand. "I want to start by explaining my philosophy," David continued, "because it's going to be the foundation of how we operate going forward. I believe that luxury isn't just about expensive products. It's about the experience we provide to every single person who walks through our doors." He paused, letting his words sink in. Crystal felt like everyone in the room could hear her heart pounding. "I've built my business on a simple principle," David went on. "You never know who someone really is based on their appearance. The person in work clothes might be a contractor who just landed a huge job and wants to buy his wife something special. The teenager browsing might be shopping with her grandmother's inheritance money. The elderly man in the worn jacket might be a retired CEO looking for the perfect anniversary gift." Crystal wanted to disappear. Every word felt like it was aimed directly at her, describing exactly the assumptions she'd made and the mistakes she'd committed. "More importantly," David said, his voice growing slightly more intense, "treating people with dignity and respect isn't just good business. It's basic human decency. In my stores, we don't judge customers based on what they're wearing or what we think they can afford. We treat everyone like they matter because they do." Riley was nodding along with everything David said, clearly agreeing with his philosophy. A few other colleagues were doing the same. Crystal sat frozen, knowing that her approach to customer service was being systematically dismantled in front of everyone. "Now," David continued, "I'll be honest with all of you. I visited this store over the weekend to observe how things naturally operate when you don't know you're being watched. Overall, I was impressed with the quality of service I witnessed. Most of you demonstrated exactly the kind of customer care that I want to see in all my locations." Crystal's heart jumped. Maybe she was safe. Maybe he hadn't noticed their interaction, or maybe he'd focused on other employees. "However," David said, and Crystal's hope crumbled, "I did witness one interaction that was completely unacceptable." The room fell silent. Crystal could feel sweat forming on her forehead as David's eyes moved around the table. "I won't embarrass anyone by naming names or describing the situation in detail," he said, "but I will say this. I personally experienced what happens when an employee makes assumptions about customers based on their appearance. I was treated dismissively, rudely, and with complete disrespect." Crystal's face burned with shame. She wanted to speak up, to explain her reasoning, to defend her actions, but no words would come. Her throat felt like it had closed completely. The employee in question made it clear that they felt I wasn't worth their time. David continued, "They suggested I shop elsewhere, refused to check for alternatives when I asked about products, and generally treated me like an inconvenience rather than a valued customer." Riley's eyes widened as she processed what David was saying. She looked at Crystal with a mixture of shock and understanding, finally putting the pieces together. "This kind of behavior is exactly opposite of what I expect from my team," David said firmly. "It doesn't matter if someone spends $5 or $5,000. They deserve the same level of respect and service. And frankly, some of my best customers over the years have been people who didn't look like they had money." Crystal finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Mr. Chen, I can explain." David held up a hand, stopping her. "I appreciate that you want to explain, but there's really nothing to explain. I experienced your customer service firsthand. I know exactly how you treat people when you think they don't matter." The weight of her mistake crashed down on Crystal all at once. This wasn't just about losing a sale or being rude to a customer. She'd insulted and dismissed the person who now controlled her career, her income, her future. The man she'd assumed was too poor to afford their products was actually wealthy enough to buy the entire store. "Moving forward," David said, addressing the entire room again, "we're going to implement new training programs focused on inclusive customer service. We're going to create policies that ensure every customer receives the same high level of attention and respect. And unfortunately, anyone who can't or won't embrace these standards will need to find opportunities elsewhere." Crystal knew with absolute certainty that he was talking about her job, her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for was about to disappear because she'd been too arrogant and
judgmental to treat another human being with basic kindness.
David continued outlining his vision for the store. Crystal sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that her biggest sale had turned into her biggest mistake. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but Crystal heard none of it. David's words faded into background noise as the full reality of her situation crashed over her like a cold wave. She sat there numb with shock and shame, watching her colleagues take notes and ask questions about the new policies and procedures that she would never have the chance to implement. When David finally dismissed the group, Crystal remained seated while everyone else filed out. She couldn't make herself move, couldn't face walking past him, couldn't bear the thought of looking into the eyes of the man she'd treated so poorly. But staying seated only delayed the inevitable. "Crystal," David said quietly, "could you please stay behind for a moment?" She looked up to find that they were alone in the conference room. David had closed the door and was walking back toward the table. His expression wasn't angry or vindictive, it was something worse. It was disappointed. "I think we both know why I asked you to stay," he said, taking the seat across from her rather than returning to his position at the head of the table. The gesture somehow made everything more personal, more painful. Crystal's voice came out shaky and small. "Mr. Chen, I want to apologize for how I treated you on Saturday." "I was wrong and I'm sorry," David nodded slowly. "I appreciate the apology, but I need to be honest with you. This isn't just about how you treated me personally. It's about what that treatment revealed about your approach to customer service and your judgment about people." He leaned forward slightly, his tone remaining calm, but serious. "Do you understand what happened on Saturday? You made assumptions about me based entirely on my appearance. You decided I wasn't worth your time because I didn't look like I had money. And because of those assumptions, you treated me in a way that no human being should ever be treated in a business setting." Crystal felt tears forming in her eyes. "I thought I was being efficient. I thought I was focusing my energy on customers who were more likely to make purchases. And that's exactly the problem," David replied. "You thought you could look at someone and immediately know their worth, their circumstances, their ability to buy things. You thought appearances told you everything you needed to know about a person." He paused, giving his words time to sink in before continuing. "Let me tell you something about my background, Crystal. 20 years ago, I was working construction to support my family while going to business school at night. I wore work boots and faded clothes because that's all I could afford. And you know what I learned during those years? I learned that the people who judge others based on their clothes or their jobs are usually the ones who understand the least about real life." Crystal wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "I never thought about it that way. I built my business by remembering what it felt like to be dismissed and overlooked," David continued. "Every time I put on expensive clothes now, I remember what it was like when people wouldn't give me the time of day because I looked like I didn't belong in their world. And I promised myself that my businesses would never treat people that way." The weight of her mistake felt heavier with every word David spoke. This wasn't just about being rude to a customer. She'd embodied everything he'd worked against, everything he'd built his success in opposition to. "I came into your store on Saturday as a test," David admitted. "I always do that when I'm considering buying a business. I want to see how the staff treats someone who doesn't look like a typical luxury customer. It tells me everything I need to know about the company's values and culture." Crystal's heart sank even further. "So you were testing us?" "I was testing your character," David corrected. "And while most of your colleagues passed that test with flying colors, you didn't. Riley in particular was exceptional. She spent nearly an hour with me, answered all my questions thoughtfully, and treated me with genuine kindness and respect. That's the kind of employee I want representing my businesses." Hearing Riley's name stung. Crystal had criticized her colleague for wasting time on an unprofitable customer, when in reality Riley had been demonstrating exactly the values that mattered most to their new owner. "I have to let you go." "Crystal," David said gently but firmly, "this isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about ensuring that everyone who walks into my stores feels valued and respected. I can't have employees who treat customers differently based on assumptions about their appearance or income." Crystal had known this moment was coming, but hearing it out loud still felt like a physical blow. "Is there anything I can do? Any way I can prove that I've learned from this mistake?" David considered her question carefully. "I believe people can change and grow, but change takes time and it has to come from within. You spent years developing these attitudes and approaches to customer service. It would take just as long to truly change them." He stood up, signaling that their conversation was coming to an end. "I'll make sure you receive a positive reference for your sales abilities. You are genuinely good at that part of the job. But I'd encourage you to think carefully about the kind of person you want to be, both professionally and personally." Crystal gathered her things slowly, her hands still shaking. As she reached the door, David spoke one more time. For what it's worth, Crystal, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you lost sight of what really matters. Customer service isn't about maximizing profits or managing your time efficiently. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person who walks through your door. Walking out of Luxe Fashion for the last time, Crystal felt like she was leaving behind more than just a job. She was confronting the uncomfortable truth about who she'd become and the values she'd prioritized. Her pursuit of sales numbers and efficiency had blinded her to basic human decency. Over the following weeks, as Crystal searched for a new job, she found herself thinking constantly about David's words and Riley's kindness. She began to notice how she interacted with service workers, how she treated people who didn't look like they could help her career, how she made assumptions about strangers based on their appearance. Slowly, Crystal began to understand that her biggest failure hadn't been treating a customer poorly. It had been losing sight of the simple truth that every person deserves respect and kindness, regardless of what they can do for you in return. She'd learned the hardest possible way that success built on judgment and dismissal of others isn't really success at all. The man in work boots had taught her the most valuable lesson of her career, not through anger or revenge, but through the simple demonstration that appearances can be deceiving, and that true character is revealed in how we treat people when we think it doesn't matter. It was a lesson that would stay with her forever, changing not just how she worked but how she lived.